So now we'll discuss the relationship of government structure and the criminal justice system. You might recall this from a civics or government class. The three branches of government. Talk about it from the federal level. The legislative, which is the U.S. Congress, they make the law, which of course is signed by the president. The executive branch enforces the law. So for an example, my agency falls under the U.S. Department of Commerce, which is a cabinet level secretary position. And then judicial interprets the law. So the most famous example would be the Supreme Court. You might recall from your reading, you had the Miranda case. Most people don't realize that that's what established the Miranda rights advisement. And that's an example where the U.S. Supreme Court reviewed a case that came before it, and that changed the law. Because before that time, police didn't have to give any kind of warning as to a person's rights against self-incrimination. And from that Supreme Court case, that's where the Miranda rights advisement comes from, which you see in shows like Law and Order, etc. So these, going back to the legislative, just like they can make the law, they can also change the law. And a good example of that is the Gibson guitar case. Gibson guitar had been investigated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for importing mahogany, using mahogany in their guitars in violation of the Lacey Act, because it was a endangered plant from South America. However, Gibson was able to, through their congressperson, introduce legislation that called the Focus Act, Fear of Overcriminalization, that would have gutted the Lacey Act. Now that didn't go through, but you can see where the relationship is, that the legislative or Congress can be lobbied and essentially change laws. There's other interrelation between these branches of government. At the prosecution level, a prosecutor's office may decline to prosecute a case for a variety of reasons. On the environmental side, environmental cases have to compete against drugs, guns, bank robbery, fraud, etc. And in only a few federal districts are there dedicated environmental sections. So if a prosecutor always declines a certain type of case, and that means those laws are not being enforced within that district. At the executive level, the president might determine what will be priorities versus what might not be priorities, and that can drastically change how the executive level cabinets enforce the laws that they have authority and jurisdiction over.